am Bernard Pucher, and welcome to CenterFrame Interviews, where we talk to talented filmmakers from all around the world. Today, I'm speaking to Andrew Laurich, who co-wrote and directed the hit short film A Reasonable Request. We're also talking about the festival circuit and his directing influences. If you're new to CenterFrame, we are a club for filmmakers where we network and collaborate and fund films and help get them in front of audiences. Be sure to visit our social media and subscribe to our newsletter on centerframe.com to get the latest news and articles and videos from CenterFrame. Now, onto the interview. All right, Andrew, it's great to see you again, man. It's been a little while since we've spoken, but it's really cool. I'm very happy to finally talk to you again, because I found out about you because of your short film, A Reasonable Request.
Yeah, it was made depressingly long ago at this point. I think we released it in 2015.
Wow.
So it's been 6 years, a little over 6 years, I think. Yeah, it was an idea a buddy of mine had that was ridiculous at the time and still is ridiculous now. It seemed undoable, and then I kind of thought about, well, maybe there's an interesting challenge in trying to ground characters in something so absurd. So wrote it and released it 2015, and it kind of made the front page of Reddit for about 6 hours and got into Sundance, and
that's brilliant.
Kind of took off from there.
I mean, front page from Reddit. That'll get you exposure. I mean, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
That was a good notch on the belt. to claim that on my epitaph.
Seriously, yeah. Here lies Andrew Laurich, front page of Reddit for 6 hours.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
For 6 hours, I was on a date at the time, and I just remember incessantly checking and refreshing the app.
Really? I bet she felt good about that.
Yeah, needless to say, it didn't work out.
So it's been 6 years. Have you watched it recently, and how's the film feel now compared to, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? Has it evolved in your mind at all since you've made it?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's evolved. It's funny because it seems to have this what's the word? Immutable life. It just keeps chugging. So the most recent time I saw it, I think it was Drexel University in Chicago had a film program in Los Angeles, and one of the professors screened it and had reached out for me to come chat with the students. And that was, I want to say, a couple of months ago. So it still kicks around and refuses to die. In terms of how it's shifted in my brain, I don't know. I think if anything, the validation of it has made me think that it is better than it probably is. And initially when I first released it, I thought it was more flawed than it probably is.
Right. I mean, I come at this from music, where the music I used to make, I look back at it now and I forget the flaws I used to hate. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There are things I used to really dislike about my music. And it's when you've heard it all the time, you're thinking about it all the time, all you think about are the flaws, and then time passes and suddenly it's like, you know what? This is not bad. You know what I mean? It's sort of like you start ignoring the things that drove you mad,
Yeah. That happens more with me with I save all my old notebooks, and occasionally I'll go back in or even old email ideas that I've emailed myself, and I'll look back and I'll say, man, why didn't I ever do anything with that? It was actually not a bad idea. But at the time, I think I was like, this is not good. I have more of those moments than ideas of looking back on ideas saying, oh, they were terrible, than I do actually as I'm writing ideas. Now I think these ideas aren't good.
Yeah.
I think I keep reaching for the past for some reason.
I think that's, but I've heard quite a few writers say that this is sort of a good, healthy skepticism about your own work is kind of necessary to make good stuff, because if you believe too much of your own, into your own abilities, you think about it critically.
The key is if the skepticism is healthy.
Yeah.
If it becomes paralysis, then it's unhealthy.
I would agree. I definitely would agree with that. I mean, it certainly doesn't sound like you've rested on any laurels because, I mean, from your bio and from your website and from everything I've seen, I mean, you've been working like quite a bit. I see a lot of commercials and saw the Trump campaign thing that you did. But before we actually get into what you're doing now, actually, I want to remind a little bit. Talking about a reasonable request, from my perspective, watching it now, it seems to have a little bit of a Squid Game-esque thing about it. And what I mean with that is it's not that it's a thriller or anything like that, but what I mean is that people are willing to do absurd things to pay off debts. You know?
Yeah.
And that is at the core of Squid Game and seems to be at the core of this. You know, have you watched Squid Game? I'm not gonna...
I have, yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm not spoiling anything.
Connection. I didn't draw myself. Yeah, that's good. It's funny when one of the first interviews I did about it back in 2015, someone asked me, you know, were you trying to tell an economic parable about the way we view money in the States and sort of viewed it through the lens of something uniquely American, because of the emphasis on a market economy and that this is something that has more relevance to Americans than maybe more socialized countries. Which is funny that Squid Game came out of Korea. Yeah. Another very market capital driven country. I don't know that there was a lot of foresight into sort of the economic messages in it, other than to say it seemed like the most polarized version of that debate. And that was kind of what we were targeting. And then post Squid Game, I guess you could have that debate of what's more taboo, murder or incest.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that depends on the country you're in. It's some things are more taboo than others in different countries, right? Yeah. You know, I mean, put it this way, in the one thing that I really like about A Reasonable Request is that it's so grounded. Like they make it completely plausible that they do this, you know? And I found that the first time I watched it, I found myself rooting for them. Yeah, just, you know what? Fuck it, just do it. You know what I mean? It's like you really, I don't think I've ever rooted for incest ever, you know, but in this case, I found myself rooting for the absurd because I felt, it felt very genuine, you know. Was that sort of a real, was that the approach to go as grounded as possible?
Yeah, I always thought the only way that idea didn't become sketch was if the characters seemed so grounded that you would believe they'd actually entertain this debate. And it sort of started with, it was, you know, in ways the writing process was sort of more of like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like, okay, well, what's the piece that makes this conversation the most difficult? So I thought, you know, we estrange the father and son, and the kid hasn't seen his dad in a number of years, and it feels like his dad is a recovering alcoholic and maybe left the family in ruin. And so asking that of a father you haven't seen in a while is much more difficult than if he had a good relationship. So that was like, okay, that's that piece. And then, you know, we show little flashes of maybe how the dad was back in the day, not really listening to his kid and clearly more concerned about money, and sort of plant the little seeds of what really motivated the dad as it related to the kid. You know, he says a couple lines like, yeah, you know, you wanted me to, you wanted to bang my French teacher, and, you know, you wanted me to become friends with the swim team coach's son, so on and so forth.
By the way, anybody who's watching this now, watch the short film before you listen any further on this interview, because it's you really shouldn't spoil it. The good thing is it's a film that keeps on giving. So I've seen it 5 times now, I think. It's been 5 times, and I enjoyed every moment. There's lots of little details on it. Where were you looking to tell the story visually? Like, what was your sort of thinking behind it? Like, how do you approach something that dialogue driven visually?
Yeah, I think it was very contrapuntal, because I think all the stylistic choices were in reaction to the absurdity of its premise, and thinking that it needed to be as dry and sober and straight as possible. So minimalist, set up sort of the two shot and the two overs. I think we had one camera move that was really subtle when the dad says a pivotal line towards the end. Camera pushes in just slightly, but that was the only movement we had, really. To be honest, a lot of it was sort of informed. I think I was fresh off of seeing this nice little video essay by a guy named Tony Zhu, who analyzed the way Fincher places characters in space. If you've ever seen Every Frame of Painting,
absolutely,
it's
Every Frame of Painting is amazing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful film study. So I thought a lot about, as an exercise, power in the scene and who had power, and the heights of the camera changes ever so slightly when the characters seem like they're more on the same level. We're a little closer, and there's visual obstructions are removed, because for most of the master, there's like a ketchup bottle in the middle between them, sort of suggesting the divide between the two characters. So there's little subtle things like that. How much that actually translates to the viewing experience, I don't know. But those were the only sort of nuances I thought of. But the location itself had a lot of the production design built into it. The scratches on the glass, the neon light outside, the street. Yeah. We just did sort of one simple top light for the characters. There might have been some fill from the front, but it's also a product of budget and time. We only had 6 hours to shoot it, and
you've really 6 hours
budget. We shot it in 6 hours. We might have had 8 hours,
but still, man.
But yeah, the actual roll time was about 6 hours, I think.
Amazing. So, I mean, I really respect that, especially the mentioning of Fincher, because he's certainly gotten more minimal over the years compared to sort of his sort of 90s work, which was much sort of flashier with his camera moves. Once you finished the film, once it got out, what was the life that it took post-release? I mean, you mentioned Reddit, but after that, where did it go? What did you do with it?
We took sort of an interesting distribution tack, and I say I'm referencing this fellow named Gabriel Miller, who was a pivotal collaborator in it. He's the guy that co-wrote it with me, and we sort of mutually took ownership over its distribution. And he was more of the sort of savvy genius of how to get it out there. He's a creative exec at an ad agency.
That helps a lot.
Tapped into how to get eyeballs, and so he kind of masterminded the scheme to get it on Reddit. But we'd also read this article by Jason Sondy, who's the head of Short of the Week, formerly on the Vimeo curation staff, and he wrote this article in 2013 about the distinction between the festival circuit and doing an online distribution, and sort of at the end of doing an experimentation with his own film, determined that not trying to preserve your film for the festival circuit resulted in more eyeballs and more attention from industry. So we decided to not respect premiere requirements of festivals. Incidentally, there are fewer now that have those for short films. So it's encouraging to try to get as many eyeballs as possible and get it out on the internet. And I think we followed the tactic of submitting it to any blogs that seemed remotely related to either the content of the film, or John Ennis, who plays the dad, has a fan base from Mr. Show and his connection with Bob Odenkirk, tweeting it at a bunch of people. And then whatever picked it up, we'd use that then as sort of bait for the bigger fish, which didn't actually work as well as it did on the Trump piece, which you referenced earlier. But at some point it did get on a Reddit, and then I think it played Raindance in London and played a couple smaller fests. And then a couple months later, I think it got into Sundance. And Sundance is obviously a crapshoot to get into. and I wouldn't recommend any filmmaker put all their eggs in a Sundance basket, but it is decidedly different than any other festival, including South by Southwest, in the amount of attention you get. So once it got in there, I took something like 30 meetings with, companies in LA, agents, managers, production companies, celebrities, companies, and so on and so forth. And then after Sundance, it sort of got picked up by other festivals that look at Sundance as a feeder. So I think it ended up playing more festivals than we actually submitted it to, just because festivals had reached out and wanted to program it.
How many?
I don't know the exact number.
How many festivals did you submit to before Sundance picked it up?
Before Sundance picked it up, I think we submitted to like 10, maybe.
All of them sort
10,
of the top
Sundance.
Tier, or like lots of smaller ones?
Mostly. Ish. I think Holly Shorts was maybe the very first fest that played. I don't know that that's top tier, but it's got a good attendance in LA, and then Rain Dance and Sundance and Portland Film Festival. And I think there was a couple we got rejected from early on. I can't remember which. But then it ended up playing about 50 or 60 fests.
But everything after
Something
Sundance was by invitation, so you didn't have to pay submission fees?
No, there were some festivals that we had submitted to pre-Sundance that didn't announce till after Sundance.
Right, okay,
so,
okay.
Say maybe 15 of those were ones that we had consciously submitted to. And then you start getting, invitations with submission waivers and that sort of thing. And at that point, you figure the success rate of getting in the festival is a little better if they're reaching out, personally.
Of course. Yeah. Actually, do you remember how much you guys spent to submit to festivals? Because in my experience, no filmmaker has ever budgeted for the amount of money it costs to submit to festivals. Like every filmmaker pretty much just budgets for making the movie, and then it's like, oh yeah, we have to send it to festivals, and we actually have to go there sometimes too. Like, so do you remember how much you guys spent in the aftermath?
Well, the hidden cost is not even the submission fees. It's once you get in, like you said, getting there and food and lodging. Unless the festival
Sundance is probably horrendous.
Sundance is still very expensive. They did. I think they gave you like a housing voucher. I don't think there was any travel reimbursement, at least for shorts. They might do for features. They might be different. I don't know the exact dollar amount. It wasn't much. Compared to other stories I've heard. I want to say we maybe spent $500 on submission fees or less than that.
Yeah, that's not very much.
But once you get it, like for example, for Rain Dance, which that at the time was the biggest fest we had gotten into, we had read that having, business cards and little brochures for your film, little postcards with the screening time was a handy marketing tool. So we spent money on printing a bunch of stuff that we never ended up using.
Really?
So there's the sort of ancillary materials that people suggest you use, but I don't know that they actually translate to anything.
Yeah, I've certainly in this whole build up with CenterFrame and building the community, I've spoken to quite a few filmmakers, and almost all of them said that they've spent anywhere between $2,000 to $5,000 sending the films to all sorts of festivals, and usually the big ones often don't actually bite until the small ones do something, because it seems to be like, at least that's what the feedback got, is that festivals need to put bums in seats too. So if a more prominent short film is better, and if there's a celebrity in it or something like that puts bums in seats, it's more likely people will show up to the screening.
Yeah, I think that's true for most fests. The interesting insight I got about Sundance in particular when I was there was at a party they had with the programmers, and everyone was drinking. So I saw that as an opportunity to kind of dig into pull back the curtain.
Let's find out some stuff.
And it was, for every filmmaker out there, it was actually, it was really heartwarming to hear what they actually do for their process. So essentially they get, was it 8,000 submissions a year or something like that?
Yeah.
And they have on staff, I think at the time it was like 20 programmers. So they split those 8,000 submissions up amongst the 20 programmers. And each programmer then is watching, I don't know what the math works out to that. Don't hold me to it now. But so, a number of films. And then they cull it down to their top, I want to say their top 4,000. And then they switch and they have the other programmers then watch some of the other films. And they finally get it down to, I think their top 250. And that's when all the programmers sit together and they all watch those 250 films together and they decide their top, 40 or whatever they're programming that year, 40 to 70, I think. It sort of fluctuates every year. So by the time that your film gets into Sundance, in theory, it's been seen, they said somewhere between 4 and 5 times. So there's a repetition and there's a process that is thorough. And I guess for features, they have interns on staff that rewatch all of the films that have been rejected in the off chance that a programmer was exhausted and tired and missed, a great gem. And I'm told that was the case for, and I'm blanking on the name of the film, that won Sundance, I want to say in 2012 or 2011, that it was actually a film that had been initially rejected. An intern saw it and said, I think this is actually good. They rewatched it and they're like, oh yeah. And then it ended up winning.
Right.
Online. So they're more thorough and more objective, at least on the short end, than you might expect. I don't know that they were tracking whether or not it played other festivals. I think they saw it, I hope, on its own merits, although they knew it was online.
Yeah. Did you get distribution or did you just stick with the whole thing on your own? Did you just sort of avoid the whole, I'm going to sell the film to, I don't know, a distributor?
Yes. A lot of people reached out for distribution and my philosophy was always, I didn't really care who was distributing it. If it got eyeballs, then it was fine. So particularly if the contract was non-exclusive, I just said yes to any distribution offer. None of the distribution offers resulted in anything more than a couple $100, I think was the most.
Yeah.
I got off of it. I don't know that distribution for shorts is a viable economic model for the filmmaker.
No, I mean, shorts generally aren't really a viable economic model for the filmmaker. I mean, they basically are, unfortunately, calling cards. I mean, certainly Quibi tried to turn it into a business model, but we kind of know what happened with that.
Yeah.
But I think in Quibi's case, I think the problem is they were trying to force it. They said, well, let's just spend a ton of money. And, what works so well on YouTube is the content creators and people's individual voices. And, it's very organic. That's why it works. Vimeo is even better example. It's people creating interesting stuff, And I think with Quibi, they were trying to force the whole thing. So look what we have and here's all the stuff. And, I think people didn't buy into it,
I have a couple friends that had projects with Quibi, and one of their criticisms was as sort of open sourced as it seemed, the decision makers were very minimal, and arguably it was one person that was the chief guy at Quibi, without naming names,
right.
Who's not a creative by nature and yet was making all these creative decisions. So it affected the caliber of the content. And they think that's a big part of why it wasn't successful. They weren't churning out good material.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing because you do find that a lot across the film industry that what I do like about Sundance is that the emphasis on filmmaking is extremely strong. I mean, they do push that very, very hard. And that's, but who started the festival? Who set the core agenda of the festival? It was a filmmaker. It was Robert Redford. And so when that's the emphasis, then that's in the DNA. That's how you look. But I've come across quite a few festivals where that's just not the case, bigger and smaller, and you can tell in the way the festival is run, and you can tell in the way they select films, and that's, unfortunately also true for a lot of distributors.
Well, even festivals, and this is a whole other discussion we could have. Our programming seems to fit a curated program.
Yeah.
So that particular year, it might be women in film or something like that. So as a male filmmaker, your chances of getting programmed in the slots that they have for male filmmakers is less. So just because a film doesn't get in doesn't mean it's not worthy of that festival. It just means whatever they're programming that year was specific. But you're right that festivals have DNAs and sort of as case studies. And this is not a knock on any of these fests, but Sundance, certainly you won't see the most technically proficient films because their whole intent is we want to find a voice. That's what they say. So if it's shot on an iPhone, like Tangerine, we'll accept it because we see the voice of a filmmaker behind it, so on and so forth. Then there's Holly Stewart's, which is run by two guys that have extensive experience in PR. So and again, as much as this is not a knock on them, I actually kind of admire their approach. The programming isn't always the best material that's out there, but the presentation and the show that they put on for the filmmakers is top notch. It's a big red carpet. They have, a lot of swag at the parties. It's at the Chinese theaters on Hollywood Boulevard. And then I had another film that played the Breckenridge Film Festival. And I don't even know why we submitted to it. I think someone else had done the research on it, but smaller fest, but it's in a market with a lot of benefactors in a high wealth community of Breckenridge, Colorado. So you have a small town, but a ton of money. And even though the festival doesn't hit the radar of a lot of filmmakers, the attention that was there was even better than Sundance. Like we had a personal liaison that meets you at the airport and takes you around. They paid for your lodging, and they had Michael Shannon was there, and they had all these celebrities because they could afford to fly them out, put them up, and so on and so forth. So festival, you got to look at the DNA of the festivals, I think, before you discount them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're partnering with the UK Film Festival here in London, and this what I've always really liked about them is that it really is run by a bunch of filmmakers. Like they all work in film in one way or the other, and their emphasis has always been we're going to stay small, we're going to emphasize on quality. It's like it's only really about that, and I think that's really one of the things I highly respect about them, which is why we're partnering with them, is because it's just it's exactly the right kind of attitude. It's very filmmaker driven, and I think looking at the DNA of a festival, I mean, I guess it's harder to spot from the outside. You're not going to find the DNA on Film Freeway, I mean, you'll have to do a bit more homework, but I think it's certainly worth looking into, and it also, I think it's film festivals are also audiences, so it's worth studying your audience when you're submitting your film. You have to kind of make an assessment as to where your film could play well. Was that sort of part of your thinking, or did you go a bit more broad with?
Yeah, not initially. I think now I would be more considerate of that. But I think Breckenridge was such an interesting case study because it just was not on my radar, and then the experience was so different than what I expected. And part of it is the audience, because you're not showing it to a town that is saturated with film like LA, where the audience is going to be skeptical from the start. They're older, detached from the industry and cinephiles. And so a lot of these small towns that host great festivals are because the community will show up to your film. And, when we played Rain Dance, I think we had 2 people in the theater.
My God.
When we played Breckenridge, we had a whole auditorium with 600 people show up to the screen.
Amazing.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough game for short films at the large festivals, though. I mean, the large festivals often, so the really big ones come with markets. So a lot of the people you really want to meet are never at the screenings. They want a screener and they'll watch it at a completely separate time. It often doesn't actually matter that you're screening. The screening itself often doesn't matter. Like all the people that need to watch it are actually they're not gonna watch it at the screening. They're gonna request a screener. They'll watch it separately.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're screening is more important than the actual screening,
Right.
which is a very different phenomenon to Fright Fest, for example, because I screened Fright Fest with Ravers. We had our premiere there in 2018, and the audience was amazing. But it's a horror film audience. Horror film audiences are fantastic. They're like the best people, and they'll cheer
Yeah.
at the craziest stuff. I love it. It's some of the most fun I've ever had is screening at horror film festivals. What was your entry point into filmmaking? Like where would you say you started saying, you know what, filmmaking, that's interesting. I want to do that. Where was that for you?
Sophomore year in high school, I took there was an acting class at my high school, and for the final final exam, you had to do a presentation on, incidentally, someone in entertainment that wasn't an actor. And I chose Steven Spielberg. And for my final presentation, he had a PC game out called Steven Spielberg's Director's Chair, where they had he had a bunch of like pre-shot clips and story elements that you could kind of pick and choose between. It's kind of like a little bit of a choose your own adventure. And then they had pre-recorded scores. You could pick between 5 of them, and you could make a little film. And that was displayed to my class at the end of the year, I guess. And the reaction was intoxicating, and I think I was hooked, and that was sort of the impetus. And from then on, I was like, I want to go into filmmaking.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I like that. That's really. What year was this?
Yeah. This would have been 99, something like that.
Right. Like that was my year too, 1999, man. Like that year turned me into a filmmaker. I totally connect with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
it was a good, the 98, 99. It was actually, if you listen to the podcast, The Big Picture, do you ever listen to that?
I know about it. I haven't listened to it.
They just did an episode where they redrafted the films of 98, and it is insane how many great movies came out in that year.
Yeah.
And I think that was the 98, 99 was sort of the pivotal year for me.
Do you know a movie where you noticed the filmmaking for the first time, where you didn't just like watch the story, but is there a film where you go, "Ooh, you know what? That's a shot and I like it." Do you have a movie that's that, or?
That is a great question. The first one that comes to mind, because I actually think it was specifically 1998, probably that slate of films that came out, where I started to really pay attention to the filmmaking of it. I think it was, and this just happens to have come out at that pivotal time when I was getting into it, but Sam Raimi's A Simple Plan.
Oh, good choice.
Where they find $4 million in the woods. And yeah. I just remember loving that story and researching how they made it and the connections with the Coen brothers, and being floored by it. It was also, I loved Pleasantville that year, and Saving Private Ryan came out. And so it was a good, it was a good hit of films to start paying attention to. And then I kind of went into, I think AFI released their top 100 films around that year,
right,
or just before. It was 97, 98. Because I know Saving Private Ryan, I think, was on the initial list. They did a redacted version in like 2007, maybe. But I started going through the films and then watching Citizen Kane a couple times, and starting to see the older filmmaking styles.
Yeah. So what makes a great movie for you? Like, do you have something where you say, when I make a movie, this is what I think makes a great movie? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I need for it to be a great film.
Yeah. I do think you have to have some interesting hook or angle to it. for me, it's funny because I saw a much lauded film this year, My Dinner with Andre. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
Louis Malle's film. It's the guy who from Princess Bride who says inconceivable. I forget his name. The actor is in it. Very young. Came out in 1982, I think, or 81.
Are you talking about Cary Elwes?
What's it?
Are you talking about?
No, not Cary Elwes. It's the short guy who. You've seen him a bunch. He's a big character actor.
Right.
He stars in the film, and it's a conversation in a restaurant, essentially for an hour and a half. And it just, interestingly, for doing a conversation in a diner, it didn't resonate with me. I just got bored and couldn't get behind it. So I do think you need you need to challenge the audience somehow by showing something unique or interesting, or not even necessarily a big premise, but a big question or a dramatic question that keeps things chugging. I think, and for me, I at least in the way I try to approach stuff is always thinking about tension and making sure that there's tension in every minute. But I'm sort of across the spectrum. I love horror films. I love dramas. I love, indies, chamber pieces.
Comedy seems to be a very strong angle you're taking. Is that because people have seen your work and they keep using you for that, or is that you just enjoy that?
It's probably both, honestly. I think particularly in commercials, you need to have a lane picked, whether or not you pick it or someone else picks it. But there's a team of sales reps and marketing people in EP that need to pitch you as a particular kind of director. So dialogue comedy is sort of the lane I'm in currently. But it's funny because I've done a lot of car commercials for Mercedes, and I've done lifestyle stuff, and I've done docu stuff for Carhartt that's more like down home 8mm Heartland America type stuff, which is completely incongruous with the comedy angle. I enjoy comedy. I don't like the comedy genre writ large. Right. It's funny because after Sundance, I signed with UTA, and they started sending me a bunch of comedy scripts that were set up at studios. And part of it is at the level I was at was not big enough to demand great scripts. Yeah. But by and large, these were scripts that were set up with either producing or actors, and they were trying to package a director with it. And they were all bad. Like, I just did not like them because they were like high school comedies or broad comedies. And it was hard to tell my agent, like I did a comedic piece, but I actually don't like comedy unless it's dark comedy or unless there's a way to sort of infuse the unexpected. I don't know. So the genre, like I don't love Judd Apatow. I think he's done some good films. I love some of the Farrelly Brothers earlier films, but I think that was sort of in the sophomoric high school stage I was at. Yeah. But I've never been one to like at night, like let's pop on a big broad comedy, Anchorman or something. It's not. Yeah. That doesn't crack my top 50 films, for example.
You do emphasize comedic performances, though. Like that's. Yeah. So that brings me to that point. What's a good performance to you? Like what do you look for in a performance? Like what's the thing? Obviously it can vary from character to character, but still, like what is there something that you look for no matter what the character?
I guess the whatever feels it. The bar is a little lower in commercials because you're just trying to find the actor that seems grounded and doesn't telegraph the humor. Yeah. In narrative, I think it's what actor really understands the dramatic truth of their character, and then once that's established, sort of thinking of the offbeat moments because sometimes comedy is just a catalyst for authenticity. Yeah. A conversation doesn't always follow the dramatic rules of a dramatic film. And oftentimes there are moments that are just silly and ridiculous. So I think for me, comedy is a reflection of what reality is versus trying to infuse comedy in reality. that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
I heard an interesting little anecdote about the Mandalorian in the episode that Taika Waititi directed.
Okay.
And they had the script, and I can't remember what episode he directed, but at the time he came in, they had already sort of established the tone and the tenor of the show. And it was the cinematographer that was shooting it, that I heard through. And he said, Taika's process is you'll shoot sort of the straight version of it, and then he'll get an idea. And so, for example, he went up to, what's his name, Pablo, the guy who plays the lead, who plays the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
The script called for him to walk down the steps of his spaceship and greet some other character. And on one of the last takes, he goes up to him and says, "You know what? On the next take, just trip down the steps." And so they did this take, and he just like tripped, and it was hysterical, but felt totally natural to what might happen, I don't know if they ended up using it in the cut. I haven't actually seen all the Mandalorian yet, but
right.
It's those kind of moments that sort of are unexpected, but reflect the reality of the situation.
Yeah, no, Taika Waititi is an interesting one. He's one of those people that really likes to experiment with tone. And tone is probably the hardest thing to achieve in a movie. Because it's so unquantifiable. Like, you can't say exactly what the tone is. How do you write down the tone? It's entirely, I don't know, it's entirely instinct, right? I mean, you
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Although I've been listening to this interview with Michael Mann, who I think is grouped with Fincher and a handful of other directors as being super sort of cerebral and calculated. And I think they try to dictate tone more consciously than a lot of filmmakers up front. And the result is you get some great films, but you also get a very sort of cold, calculated tone.
Yeah.
It's reflected in the material versus, Spielberg or Zemeckis or I think a lot of those guys just sort of think like, well, what's fun? What's gonna be a fun moment on camera, and sort of let their instincts and taste guide the tone.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned those directors versus the others. I mean, especially in the sense that Spielberg is known for experimenting with tone, but by genre. Yeah, I mean, so he genre hops pretty much more than any other director I've seen. I think the only other director I know that genre hopped as brutally as he has is Stanley Kubrick, but he just took the genre and said, "I'm going to make a Kubrick movie out of this."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never lose Kubrick in the Kubrick jumps.
Do you write entirely yourself as well, or do you usually always collaborate?
Mostly collaborate.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, lack of confidence.
What in your writing?
I think that's probably it. I think I find it a little easier to remove some of the responsibility for the totality of a project. And also I enjoy the collaborative process. And I have a feature in development that I co-wrote with actually a writer in London. This other thing I'm working on is co-write. I'm trying to think if I have a script. I'm working on a couple of spec scripts that I'm writing solo, but most of the projects are some sort of collaboration.
Oh, I know it's a spec script, so therefore you don't want to say too much, but can I ask what the genre is that you're going for with that one?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of spec scripts, but the one is I don't know how you would describe it. It's like a sports comedy. It's a union between adaptation and trouble with the curve.
Oh, right. Wow. It's
a weird, it's a story that it briefly, it's about this area in Mumbai, India, where there is a golf course, the Bombay Presidency Golf Club is one of the most exclusive golf courses in the country, and it's a country that doesn't have many golf courses. And directly adjacent to the golf course is one of the poorest slums in the city, and it's separated by this thin white fence. And over the years, kids in the slum have watched these golfers from their rooftops or backyards,
right,
and not having the resources to golf, but still emulating them. They created golf clubs out of like wrought iron and little plastic balls, and they created this golf course in the slum. And there's an actual guy who became like the Tiger Woods of the slum and ended up making it onto the Indian PGA Tour.
Wow.
So the story was initially about him, and I got his life rights and thought the story was amazing. But then I was like, well, I can't, as a white guy in this climate, I can't be the only one to try to bring authentic voice to this story. So I found this Indian writer in Florida, who's great, named Mansoor Ahmed, and he and I started collaborating on it, and we struggled with what happens at the end of this story, because he's not actually he's not doing great, and then it's a story regardless, he still chases his dreams. But the more I started interfacing with his writer, the more it was interesting what his perspective was on it. And so now it's a story of these two people trying to do these extraordinary things. The Indian writer trying to crack this story as a guy who has a similar trajectory, trying to make it in a field that seems way above his station as a kid that comes from, a middle-class American Indian family and so on and so forth. So it's about the writer going to India and trying to like meet the actual character he's writing and blah, blah, blah.
That's really cool. I love that idea. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So, so that's your next project. Is that what you're sort of aiming for to make your next movie?
No, I think that's down the road. I have a script that I developed with Fox that they'd financed the writing of it, and so it's set up there for potential production next year.
Nice.
And that's sort of a creature feature.
Oh, cool.
Father-son story, but that's more like
no incest this time.
Squid and the Whale. What's it?
No incest this time.
No incest. Well, yeah, no incest. But it's sort of like if you ever seen the Squid and the Whale meets like The Descent.
Oh, that's wicked. That sounds really cool.
And then I'm pitching on a feature that would shoot in New Zealand later this next year, and that's kind of like a little two-hander chamber piece. It's kind of fun. And then I have a TV show in development that we're just starting to pitch. We've been packaging it for the last 3 years.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of my slate.
So thanks very much for joining us on the interview, Andrew. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of CenterFrame Interviews. Join the conversation on our social media. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to visit centerframe.com to sign up to our newsletter and to get the latest updates.